Welcome to the Jeff and Alex podcast. I am Jeff Hillemeyer, and with my friend Alex Gonzalez, we explore topics that help you be your best self. And we also get to chat with some great guests. So join us now on the Jeff and Alex podcast.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Jeff and Alex podcast. Hello, Jeff. How you doing?
I'm good, Alex. How are you?
Oh, pretty good. Pretty excited about today. We have another guest. Her name's Vivian Greentree. She's an executive at Fiserv, but her remit over there is pretty amazing.
It is, and I'm particularly interested in hearing her thoughts on the transition, because she comes from a military background to corporate, and where sort of purpose fits into that. I've just been really looking forward to this interview for a while.
Yeah, and they're doing some amazing things, and I think it'll be interesting to talk a little bit about, particularly over the course of the spring and summer, how someone in a role around corporate citizenship and diversity and inclusion. I mean, everything that we're talking so much about is really center a stage for her. So, and by the way, some people sometimes don't realize how corporations get engaged from a social impact perspective too. So anyways, let's have this conversation, and let's bring Vivian Greentree into the Jeff and Alex podcast. Hello, Vivian Greentree. Welcome to the Jeff and Alex podcast. How are you doing?
Great. It's great to be here.
Oh, good. Well, welcome to our crazy world here on mornings that we get to just talk about almost anything. Hey, and of course, I know you met Jeff Hillemeyer here.
That's right. And
Hi,
we're both wearing our swag. Alex, where's your swag?
You know what? It's been one of those non-swag days. Oh, there you go. Well, see, I don't have I will promise you, Vivian, if I somehow get some Fiserv swag, Jeff knows I'm the most swag greedy person. I have, selfish swag today, but I'll wear Dragon Army stuff. Mark Gorlin over at Rhodey, I'm always wearing his stuff. So just so you know, not that I'm not asking for anything, but just a hint.
On the list.
So look, I love having you here. There's so much to talk about, and I want to talk about your current role at Fiserv. But before we get in there, there's something in your background that I find interesting, and you have a military background, and I just remember from my days at GE, I remember we had so many military vets that would come into the GE, either junior military officers or whatever the case might be, but would love to, just to kind of start things out, would love to hear about your kind of military experience and kind of how you bridged into the corporate world.
Yeah, I do. It's, I was going to say literally and figuratively, because that's actually right behind me is one of my husband's, when he was an ops officer in Iraq. And I didn't know if you were literally or figuratively. He did just retire this year too, which was Jeff and I were talking about a little earlier, was actually why we got to move back to Atlanta. So for the first time in 20 years, I've been able to choose where to live. And, being from DeKalb, being, from Tucker, we chose Georgia. So I would say, the military experience has come full circle for me, because I get to move home and then, want to make Georgia a place where veterans and their families want to retire to, and their families start businesses, join businesses. But I did, I went to Georgia, joined the Navy, was Supply Corps officer, which funnily enough back then was in Athens. So I graduated from Athens and then went back to Athens with the courtesy of the Navy for Supply Corps school. It's no longer there. I think they gave that land back to the school. But, I transitioned out. I went off active duty, went into the reserves. At the same time, Mike stayed on active duty. So my transition, I think, into the, back into the civilian world was paved by the fact that Mike was still on active duty. So I didn't, I still had health care. We still had income. It was very certain, just because, we were moving and started having, our family, but I did have I would say the luxury of having, because we were dual income, to have the income as I transitioned. And I mentioned that because in a lot of ways, when service members are transitioning out, that is, there's some big, kind of key pillars or factors for that transition, and whether they're successful in pursuing education, pursuing, private sector employment, or starting their own businesses. Mine was a lot more around a loss of identity on just being part of a team and having a mission that we were all invested in. And so and I do think that has definitely carried through everything I've done since, with that idea of just being part of something bigger than yourself and promoting that within the nonprofit, sector. And now on the private side, I think a misunderstanding about the private sector is that, you can do well while doing good. I don't know, Jeff, this is your sweet spot too, but the less that we create obstacles between people seeing, purpose, passion, and profit, the better off we'll all be.
Do you think that mentality and that philosophy that you just shared came from your experience in the military, or do you think that was just in you sort of always, and maybe it's sort of developed over time, or did that specifically come from your time in the military?
I think, and even for a lot of families, the military service is starting to become a family business. And I actually don't see that as a good thing, only because it's the smaller and smaller population that are serving. So I do think, actually having my kids grow up as military kids, they probably have been imbued with that sense of you're born here in this country with so many amazing opportunities, and along with that comes obligations, and I think we had to do that as a military family, because otherwise the service, their father was deployed five times when they were young. So if we weren't doing that for a purpose beyond ourselves, I think it's hard to explain to your kids and to your families on why service matters, whether it's in the military or not. I come from, my mom was in the Atlanta Police Department. My stepdad was in APD, my grandfather. So I think that service, I wanted to be in the Navy. Maybe it was Top Gun.
Yes.
Wanted to be Maverick or date Maverick. No, I'm kidding. My husband, no. I don't think I've ever dissected that quite so fully as to right now. But
that's what we're here for, Vivian. This is really what the focus is going to be for the next 15 minutes.
But I do think, once you do serve, and it's not only veterans, I think, especially now, being the head of our diversity and inclusion programs, it really stemmed from our military and veterans affairs program, because it was how do you recruit veterans? Veterans will do better if they have these services, or if they have employee resource groups, or if we have policies that support their Guard and Reserve service. And it's well, everybody would do better if we had good policies that don't make them choose between, what they do for a living and who they are as a person. Or, we have representation that, looks like them, and allow them a seat at the table. And so it's about total employer value proposition. And one of the things that veterans, I do think, bring in, and, more and more millennials kind of drove this conversation, is around purpose within the workplace. And, the most fulfilled people are also the most productive. They're the most engaged. They delight clients, and that's where I think this conversation on corporate citizenship and social impact really has hit, if 2020, if one good thing comes out of it, yeah, I think we're more open to see each other's humanity, because we're in each other's houses. Right. We might be meeting our kids for the first time because they run across the room, or we're in a place where I don't think we were on the private side before, and we're more open to those conversations, because we know that if we don't support people where they're at, we'll never get the best work out of them, because that can't be the only thing, and it's not the only thing that they've done. And veterans, to pull it back, have really driven that conversation in a lot of ways, because a lot of them did join out of college or out of high school. And so their first employer was someone, we call the military a greedy institution, because you're connected to it way past 9 to 5, because of what your mission does. It supports the missions of your teams. It's a team of teams. And then they bring that when they come out, they expect that in their employer. They expect that in their communities. And if employers, if we don't find a way to channel that and, allow for it and then plug into it, like we'll be missing out.
So I think it's a good transition, Vivian, to talk about now your current role, heading up corporate citizenship and also president of the Fiserv Cares Foundation. So one, let's talk about what even Fiserv is and then what the role is. But I'm just really looking forward to getting into this topic because I think there's a lot of people who do not think doing good and corporations can coexist. Yet this is what you do every day to make it part of the fabric of your company and the community. So talk about your role and talk about a little bit what Fiserv does.
Right. So, I mean, we say Fiserv is and I know you could say this in any other city, but Atlanta, transaction alley, fintech, capital of the world, but which is great. I mean, we are one of the biggest fintechs in the world, and we like to think the best fintech in the world. And we do, we move money at the speed of life. I don't know whether sound or light is faster, but I actually think life moves faster than either. And so I am our strategic advisor for how we create a culture where our associates, we say strive, thrive, and have drive. So I oversee all of our diversity and inclusion efforts, including our 8 employee resource groups, our associate engagement, community engagement. Part of that is through the Fiserv Cares Fund, and our strategic philanthropy, because we know, and it goes back to that total employer value proposition. And when we look in terms of how we treat our associates, so we can serve our clients in sustainable communities, that's really, you have to kind of go through, for sustainable impact. We've learned that the areas of diversity and inclusion, associate engagement, community engagement, when they're coordinated at the corporate level, when you're using your first best use of resources towards not just profit, but passion, that's where you get these, the magic is, because that's where high performing teams are, they can say, I'm a valued member of a winning team doing meaningful work and an environment of trust. And those are all, over time, we've kind of hit on each of those words because, trust is important because you can't innovate without trust. And, to have trust, you have, progress moves at the speed of trust. And, ROI, return on investment, there's a return on inclusion and your investment into inclusion. Because again, like trust, if you can't be, vulnerable to create new ideas and have some of them fail, you fail kind of forward, entrepreneurship. And you can't do that if you're not in this team where you feel like a valued member and everyone has an equitable opportunity to join and belong and contribute, and progress. And so that's really, where I spend a lot of energy.
I'm curious, as you talk about purpose and people maybe finding their purpose or, their true calling a little bit more this year because of what's been happening. But do you do any work? I know IHG does a little bit of work like this. Do you do any work to help people at Fiserv find their purpose?
Yes. And I think that's such a good, I want to take notes of the questions you're asking me. I'm like, that's such a good question. It is. And I think we do have an opportunity, again, in 2020. So, one of our, an effort we have, and specifically in Atlanta too, with our Back to Business, which is to help small minority and Black owned businesses recover from COVID with business grants. So we're doing $10,000 grants. We're going to do $1 million in Atlanta over the next year. But as part of that, kind of just as important is that community investment piece, so that we're supporting the systems of incubators and resource providers and aggregators of small minority and Black owned businesses, and really all small diverse businesses, and really all small businesses, because we know that kind of where goes small business is going to go the economy. And we do that every day. That's the first best use of our corporate resources. So how then do you align that with passion? Well, then with our employee resource groups, we've developed the volunteer catalog so that if I'm an expert in cybersecurity, I can give that subject matter content to all these small, business aggregators in a way that we just maybe had not connected before. So that we're creating we're turning a moment into this movement where there is an inflection point here. And Atlanta, the US, Atlanta, the private sector, fintechs specifically, because of our digital online e-commerce, speed of life decisions, we can be the make or break for these small businesses. And that's important. I think what makes it important and scalable and sustainable is to get our associate population just as involved so that they feel like part of the recovery efforts and that we're building inclusion into that. So that our when we come out of 2020, we'll be stronger, safer, faster together. And I do think there's that element of, finding your passion or being able to, and 2020, like people want to help each other. It's like if I'm doing relatively well right now because I want to turn around and then say, but how can I help other people get to, where I am? And I think, too, again, taking that veteran piece, I feel very, lucky and thankful to have the job that I have. I actually, when I came to the private sector, I was in a national nonprofit to support military families and was kind of, given the opportunity. And I feel an enormous debt of gratitude that someone saw in me, I thought the SEC, well, to me, the SEC is Southeastern Conference, right? Now it's the Security Exchange Commission. And I want to do that, for others who might not know who, Fiserv is, what a fintech is, and how there's just infinite opportunity to have impact, past, credit cards and debit cards, but what that means behind it. And commerce and, building sustainable systems that are inherently more inclusive across, the digital divide, not leaving unbanked or underbanked behind. In Atlanta, our ecosystem has just so many ways to plug into that. I think that's where you can, people have passion and purpose that they might not have thought about. Hey, what I do every day can help people.
So Vivian, if I think about your role, and we've been, fortunate enough to get to know each other, with through the Metro Atlanta Chamber and all the work you're doing in the community. But obviously, earlier this year as COVID hit, which of course then we went into a summer of, of course, racial equity becoming very front and center. So first of all, how did you even personally, because there's so many leaders that are helping their organizations to get through all this and COVID, particularly when COVID hit, how did you first of all process that? And then how do you help an organization that the scale of Fiserv kind of get focused on where we're going to do good? Because there's so much that needs to happen, from healthcare to small businesses to homelessness. How do you, in a time like this, how do you help get focused around the things that you could have the most impact on?
That's it. Alex, that's another great question because I think, for any, inclusion starts with I, so that our individual actions and impact our collective actions. And so taking time to hold a moment and hold space and place to, we had associate convenings, we had, Q&A sessions, all of our employee resource groups individually held conversations. And then we had collective conversations again, so that we had some, not even two-way feedback, but like a continual loop of our teams of teams, which is really, so that's a Stan McChrystal book, Team of Teams and Communications. So in the South, we just say all y'all. So it was all y'all. It was groups of y'alls and it became an all y'all.
I like that.
Exactly. You can Southernize any, any saying. And so we held that, those, series of conversations. That's how we came up with our Forward Together plan. And through that, and we knew at the time, so we were already, back in March when immediately small businesses had to shut down, or many had to move online for the first time, or began to take credit or debit because they had only been cash. So we were already in the space of how to have impact for small businesses and really like COVID recovery. But then data started coming out about the disproportionate effect on minority and Black owned businesses. And that, one of the statistics we heard was, 40% might not recover. And so it was, because again, of like what we do every day, we thought this is where we can truly have an impact and be a make or break for these small businesses. So then we came up with the grant, the Back to Business grant program. And then we already had relationships within communities with resource groups, aggregators, chambers of commerce, like the Metro Atlanta Chamber, which, because we were, sending back you and David and how we could work to support, and the Georgia Chamber, Atlanta Black Chamber, certainly the Russell Center, and Jay's talking points around access, and Jeff, being from DeKalb, it's like we want the same access for if you're in Bankhead or Buckhead, and that to me is such a yes, and we'll all be better for it. In Atlanta collectively, the private sector collectively, in Georgia, because we, retain the talent. And so, I think it's having those internal conversations. It's, they're uncomfortable. There's a lot, I think Brene Brown calls them courageous conversations for a reason. It can be, uncomfortable to learn new things or information that, you didn't know otherwise, and how to integrate that into your, not just your work conversations, but your conversations with your families, and your communities and your schools, on top of that social isolation. Everybody, and because we were going through a merger to these two huge companies. And so there were all, and every company is at every level different, it's meeting people where they're at, because we're all on this journey. And I think, when we can recognize that the journey is the destination, like there's not at any one time where any one company or any one community or any one person could say like, well, I know enough now, like done. You might want to feel like that because of the onslaught, but we can't do that. And so I think allowing, taking the feedback from our associates, saying, this is how we can have the most impact. And this is also what we want to do. These are the groups we want to support. This is how we want to give back. This is what I do every day really well. I'd like to use that in service to small, diverse businesses. That's, I think, how we, channeled and evolved the conversation, because we have a unique position where we have a small business footprint. I mean, globally, but certainly, nationally, it's every industry, every geographic region, every state. And we have this, wonderful partnerships with banks, financial institutions, minority deposit institutions across the country. And, to help those two communicate with each other for the betterment of all is, I do feel, again, like just very thankful to be where I am. And I think many of my associates do too. And that's why it's, taking this moment where if there's an opportunity to talk about social impact and the importance of inclusion, but as a business case.
Right.
Yeah, I think it's amazing that Fiserv, again, just everything that you just said is looking both inward and outward, and all the things that you guys do as a company to make an impact on diverse communities. That's wonderful. I think too many companies just do sort of what might be the easy part, which is, more of like just internal, which is important, but how can their business actually affect? I think that's great that you guys are focused on that. I do want to make sure we say, I think we're recording this a couple of days before Veterans Day. So on behalf of Alex and I, thank you and your husband for your service. We really appreciate that. Yeah.
Thank you for, helping to make Atlanta, the destination city. I want to join you in that effort. So
yeah, we'll loop you in now. You're stuck with us.
Exactly.
But I do have a question though. I'm really curious because I spend a lot of time in both the nonprofit and for-profit sector, and I'm always looking at what one inherently does maybe better that the other can learn from. I'm really curious from the military perspective. So it's a sort of a two-parter. As you think about maybe what is inherent in the military experience that is hard but important, but hard to get to happen in corporate, and then maybe vice versa. Is there something in corporate that's just baked in that's really hard to then transition to get a military team or division, sort of embracing?
Yeah, that's That's a good one. I do think, meritocracy in the military is very transparent. Like equity, I think the private sector is catching up with that. But in the military, you get paid, like they literally issue the pay rates. So everybody knows you do this, you do this, you do this. So I did, and then if you're, a woman or underrepresented group, as soon as you transition out, you might be paid less, and you just because of gender and, so that's one. I do think though that the larger, and maybe it's not that the military has a stronghold in it, or that the corporate sector does, but I think maybe the corporates, we haven't talked as openly about the fact that altruism really is a powerful force, and generosity and civic spirit, and things that people associate with, those who serve, whether in the military or any public service, right? It doesn't have to be in the military. But I think that we do depend on that, because we do have an all volunteer force. So whatever reason, encourage someone to sign up, it's like an original renewable resource and human capital. And that, if we have to utilize it like a muscle, exercise it like a muscle. And I do think that we can benefit from that on the private sector side. And the system, and I say systems thinking too, but not in the way that it's like, but it's just the way that, it's like when President Kennedy talked to the, janitor at NASA, and he said, "What are you doing?" He said, "I'm putting a man on the moon." I think in the military, you get that, and you have to, because, you scrub a lot of decks in the Navy, at least. And you have to think that you're doing this menial thing in pursuit of, this larger mission with your team of teams. And if, that's what gets you through the bad days, or the, nondescript days, knowing that you are part of something greater than yourself. And I just feel like the companies, and some do it very well, and some are just getting there. Again, it's the journey. And we need to meet everyone where they're at on the journey, to show them that, when we set systems up to be inclusive and to include people, to have representation and create mirrors and not windows, so that people can see themselves as part of your organization, then they will do better, whether it's the private sector, the public sector, the nonprofit sector, communities, schools. Yeah. So that was a big mishmash, but I think the more we have on both, entrepreneurs within the military, and, maybe military representation in the labor market, will do better.
I was hoping, if I could just real quick, I was hoping that that's where you would go. So not having had any military experience, but, the thing that I find the difference between nonprofits and for-profits is it's very hard to get a for-profit, a person like the janitor at NASA, to really believe in the cause, partly because most companies don't have a cause. And if they do, a lot of times it's just words on a wall and it's not brought to life. Whereas in a nonprofit, it's all about the cause. You don't have to, people are making low wages. They're working hard because they want to solve this problem. And so that's, to me, what I thought, and that's what you sort of hit on, is if you're part of the military, you're there because you believe in what is happening and that you're protecting your country and so forth. And that, to me, and it sounds like a lot of, if I pulled out a lot of the language you spoke about Fiserv and what you guys are doing, you're giving people a sense of, you can believe in this company, and being a part of this company makes the world a better place, which is, it's really hard to find in corporate America.
It's discretionary effort, and to have someone's, discretionary effort. The military, they can compulse you to do it, but eventually you have to rely, and you also, it's the person on the, usually the lowest, not the, the entry levels have the most engagement with clients and your community. So if you don't have the hearts and minds, at least on most days of those, you're losing. It's not just opportunity cost, it's not just opportunity cost, it's opportunity loss, because you just don't even know what you could be if you had that extra discretionary effort. And so that's why I think, it's nothing that can be compulsed, but companies that do put the effort in on the front side, I think will have rewards on the the follow-up. And I mean, BlackRock, that's not just corporate citizenship speaking, you know, BlackRock issues that letter. Our CEO, Frank Bisignano, says, you know, we have an obligation to use our space and place, but we have an opportunity to use our space and place. And I love moving, you know, instead of corporate social responsibility, let's socialize responsibility so that everybody feels, you know, equal opportunity in being inclusive, so we can innovate together, drive revenue, create, you know, these communities where all the veterans want to move to.
Right. No, this is great. This is great. And I love that you're connecting this to, if you do this, we could innovate better. And it just tries, it's very symbiotic. But one thing I was going to mention, just back from my GE days, I want to say it's just a decade ago, although I think it might be multiple decades now. I don't want to, reveal much, but one thing I do remember, Vivian, you mentioned about this aspect of meritocracy, and at that time at GE, it was just, it was the ultimate meritocracy from a corporate perspective. And as we would get folks from the military, whether they're junior military officers, whatever it is, whatever the program was to come in, they just thrived in it because there's so much transparency in terms of, this is what I need to do. This is the objective. This is the purpose. And what I loved about it too, it would create clarity of purpose sometimes. Because, in a big company, sometimes things just happen. But you had them as they would just grow as leaders so fast within the company because they would figure out what's the purpose. And then this would be very transparent how it gets measured. So I definitely could connect with that, having seen that in action. Also not military myself, but having seen it with some of my best friends from GE were prior military.
Well, no, and then it's, and then everyone does better, right? When there's clarity, career pathing and mapping and internal mobility. And so that's another, we learned that lesson with our military program too. And then, but eminently transferable to all populations where everyone, would do better,
right.
Can see themselves joining, because not everyone, you can't just join at the top, you have to work your way up. And as long as we create pathways for that, you keep that energy there.
Absolutely. So one thing, Vivian, is I know time flies here, but one thing I do want to talk about, because there's so many things that you are doing, and we can't do it all justice here just in the few minutes we have. But one thing you did do, which is with one of our great friends here that I know Jeff and I both know, but with Jay Bailey and the Russell Center. Exactly. I love that reaction. You mentioned Jay's name, you'll just light up. And he's doing amazing things, not just for Atlanta, but for the country, for the world. But talk a little bit about what you and Fiserv have been doing with Russell Center, because I think when you talk about inclusive entrepreneurship and small business and all that is such an amazing example of when you get behind something like that, how it's going to make a material impact. So I'd love to hear a little bit what you're doing with them.
Yeah, and he, so our Back to Business grant program and community investment, he was one of the first ones. I actually heard him speak at the Metro Atlanta Chamber Board meeting last year, maybe 2 years ago now. Like this last year has kind of been a time warp. Right. Like it was March for 4 months. Now it's December. I don't know. But I heard him, and to draw it all back to veterans, which are the most diverse population in the country. So but we support Syracuse University's Institute for Veteran and Military Families and their Center for Excellence for Veteran Entrepreneurship and a coalition for veteran-owned business. And Frank started that when he was at JP Morgan, stood up that IVMF at Syracuse. And Jay and the Russell Center is the first time I have seen that kind of growth potential to become an IVMF, which again, it's located at Syracuse, but that's national program. They partner with the SBA, they have Back to Business, that we have a 50 fastest growing veteran-owned businesses in the country. We have a coalition of veteran-owned business with Fortune 500 partners like, Disney and Walmart and, to support, access to resources, access to capital, access to supply chain. And when I met with Jay, he, has the same vision to connect space and place, to connect industry, to, connect state, federal, local, private, public, nonprofit, academic, all in the same, and it's just when you hear that, it's so exciting. And he says, the difference between bankhead and buckhead is access, opportunity, and exposure. And I know that's the case because of what we've done with the veteran business population. And it's it's your network. Your network is your net worth, whether you're looking for a job or to start a business. And we want to, wouldn't it be amazing if Atlanta, housed the national preeminent resource provider for Black and minority owned businesses? Because we have the time, treasure, and talent to do it. Why would we cede that to any other city or state? And so what he's doing, again, connecting, financial institutions, access to capital, resource providers, chambers of commerce and aggregators, Atlanta Village Market, Atlanta Black Chambers, even, the Metro Atlanta Chamber. David sent me over when we first started talking, all the resources that the Metro Atlanta Chamber provides, second and third order effects. And so, and Jay makes it easy because you just say, Jay, this is do this. And it's it's a neutral, he wants to bring all those together so that we can all, be better for it, because none of us could do it on our own. And maybe, yeah.
Yeah, no, and I think it's great. So first of all, thank you for what you're doing with Jay, and that was pretty cool to, in this world where we cannot be, where we're mainly virtual, you're able to have a quasi-physical event to kind of launch, that is. So it's kind of cool to see the your trucks out there and all that. But I think it's great. So look, I think we could go on. We're just scratching the surface. So, you have an open invitation, obviously, to always come back. But I just enjoy hearing. One is, let me encourage people, if you do not follow Vivian on social media, we'll put a link, particularly in LinkedIn, to really see the story of corporations and doing good and purpose coming together. And I think there's very few stories better than what Vivian's doing and with Fiserv's doing. So make sure you follow to see it in action, and also doing some real things that's beyond just the brochureware in terms of what's happening too. And also just Vivian's a cool person to know. So
speed of life.
Exactly, speed of life. So we're going to move to the speed of life. So Vivian, thanks for joining us here in the Jeff and Alex podcast.
Thanks for having me. Y'all are a good. I like this. This is a good duo.
Well, we will
get information out there.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was awesome to hear your story and finally put a face to the name.
Great.
We'll see you soon. All right. Well, that was Vivian Greentree here on the Jeff and Alex podcast. So, what Jeff? That was something. I know I learned stuff, and I talked to Vivian on a regular basis, but I definitely learned stuff.
And that was my first exposure to her. And oh my gosh, I have a dozen questions that I didn't get a chance to ask her. Hopefully we'll have her back. She was amazing.
Well, and one thing, and I know when we're going into it, we talked about her military background, and we were going to talk a little bit about it, but I really learned so much, could connect so much from the perspective she brings and how it shapes what she does every day. And so, yeah, I just loved it. And she's a fabulous person. So if you do not follow Vivian, make sure you go on LinkedIn and follow her in particular. She has some great stories to tell. And of course, make sure while you're out there, you also click follow Jeff and I on social media, interact with us as we tell these stories, and make sure to follow us on the Jeff and Alex podcast, on your favorite podcast platform, and on YouTube. And most importantly, both. And so Jeff, I guess we'll be talking again in about a week.
Yeah, I will see you then.
We'll see everybody soon.